This is Minding the Forest, a podcast of the Louisiana Forestry Association. Hello, I'm your host, Jeff Zeringue, media specialist for the LFA. In Minding the Forest, we talk about all things forestry. Forest landowners, loggers, and wood manufacturers, such as lumber, paper, and pellet mills, all play an important role in the conservation and management of forests for the important natural resource it is. Managed forests offer more for wildlife and water protection, so the LFA advocates to keep forests as forests. This episode of Minding the Forest is sponsored by First South Farm Credit. First South is your premier rural lender. With over 100 years financing timber and agriculture, they have the expertise you're looking for when financing rural property. If you're looking to purchase or refinance land, call your local First South Farm Credit office or find them online at firstsouthland.com. We have with us Dr. Mike Strain, who's the Commissioner of the Louisiana Department of Agriculture and Forestry. Dr. Mike,
Great
to have you
Thank
here.
Thank you.
Tell us a little bit about your journey to become the Commissioner of Ag and Forestry.
Well, I'm a veterinarian and a farmer by training and profession, and I was always very active in what's called organized veterinary medicine and the Farm Bureau Federation. And so I was legislative chair and also on the National Legislative Action Team for the Farm Bureau. And I handled the legislative affairs for the Veterinary Medical Association, which at the time represented over 800 doctors and 400 hospitals. And so I was very busy and active in the Louisiana legislature as my cousin, Big Bill Strain, who had served there 28 years, was chairman of House Agriculture. And so in the year 1999 in July, Bill untimely, he died in office. And I qualified 2 weeks later and decided, and I was running for state representative in the 74th district, and I was elected on a Saturday and started serving on a Monday there in 1999, October 99. And after 2 full terms in office, I decided to run statewide for Commissioner of Agriculture and Forestry. So along the way, I was chairman of the Rural Caucus. I served on the House Ag Committee, on the Environmental Committee. I served on the Health and Welfare Committee. And so that was very, very, very busy. And and that was a part of my training, the legislative training. And then, I ran and was elected statewide, and that was 16 years ago that I was elected as Commissioner of Agriculture and Forestry, and the 7th commissioner in the history of Louisiana.
And this year, you were
reelected without opposition.
Yeah,
tremendous honor. And of course, we have been extremely busy. The good Lord looks after us because during this time, we've been so busy with the wildfires and now the water issues and water intrusion to where it's been nonstop. It's been nonstop since, qualifying finished in the second week, of August, and these wildfires really kicked up in the third week of August, and we have been at it full steam ever since.
Louisiana remains an agrarian state, and the impact to the country really is very important.
Louisiana
is a key issue.
85% of all Louisiana is in agriculture, forestry, and aquaculture. 85% of the land mass. It's our largest industry. 5 of the 14 largest ports in the United States are in Louisiana. The vast majority of all grains that are exported through Louisiana ports. So we feed a great deal of America and a great deal of the world. And the majority of the food that is exported from the United States, and we are the largest exporter of food in the world, comes through Louisiana. And so we are an agrarian state. And so that is a mainstay of our economy and our culture.
I know this is not related to anything that we're talking about today, but I have to, because I'm curious. I never asked. The gas pumps have Department of Ag and Forestry to gauge them. Why is that?
Because I'm also the commissioner of the Office of Metrology, Weights, Measures, and Standards. Okay. And so many departments of agriculture have that responsibility. So every device that weighs or measures has a seal on that, and that means that machine has been calibrated, that it's a machine that meets national standards, and my name and my phone number is on each and every machine. If there's a problem, there's a hotline, and now you can just use your iPhone and just hit that code, and it will bring you to a complaint form. And so I'm responsible to weigh, to measure, and set the standards or enforce the standards on everything. So what is a ton? What is a pound? What's an ounce? What's a gallon? What is a 1 pound package of frozen shrimp or crawfish? What is a gallon of gasoline? Is it a gallon, and is it gasoline? What is the oil? So it's not only weighing and measuring to make sure that what you pay for, what you're getting, the orderly conduction of commerce. It's also to make sure that what is in that container is what is on the label and that it meets national standards. So we have testing laboratories, we have field inspectors, and we inspect, if you talk about, service stations with weighing and measuring devices, over 150,000 inspections a year just in that area. And so just about everything in commerce, one form or the other, we touch. So whether you are, weighing a truck going across the scales with a load of soybeans, or if you are, just at the grocery store where they're checking you out with a scanner, or you go into the pumps to get gasoline or diesel or high octane or whatever, we are responsible to make sure that that is accurate.
I had to ask. I know it's kind of off topic for today, but what we really wanted to talk to you about is the fires that Louisiana has had to deal with this year.
Our 10-year average is 771 fires. Now we had over 1,400 fires last year. But in the month of August alone, we had 555. We've had 144 this month. We're well over getting close to 1,100 fires for this year. And so, we had a fairly normal fire season until the 22nd of August when we had Tiger Island, which we put out. The first fire was around 8 acres, put that out. Then we had the massive second fire. And then we had these large fires predominantly in the southwestern, south central, and some in the northwestern part of the state. Very large fires. Those fires were in the flight path of Hurricanes Laura, Delta. We also had some that were in the path of Ida. But you had a situation where we had 1.1 million acres of timber on the ground from the hurricanes that had not been cleaned up. And then we also had one of the driest droughts, really one of the harshest droughts in record. And so a lot of areas, no rainfall since April. Another situation where there was a continuous high-pressure system hovering over the state, pushing the humidity down very low and also not allowing any moisture to come in from a tropical storm or a hurricane. The Gulf was quiet the whole time, which is extraordinarily unusual. You saw the hurricanes that came, got pushed, and went up the East Coast. And so then you had all those things in combination, and then you would have where we would get wind gusts up to 30 or 40 miles an hour and set up a very unique situation. You saw the firenadoes, the tornadoes of fire that we saw. And then what happens is that everything was, quote, ready for a perfect storm. It was so dry, so hot, temperatures 106, 109, 110 without the added temperature from the fires. And, once they were ignited, with that wind and with the debris on the ground, it was a very, very difficult thing to fight those fires. But then in addition to that, under normal circumstances, once they are under control, then they simply simmer and burn themselves out. We had some fires to reignite after a month. Wow. Some where the needles would drop and then the wind would blow them across. But we would also have reignition of some of the areas within the large fire zone that had not burned for whatever reason. A fire went around it to catch on fire. Wow. You also have a situation where because of the weather conditions and the heat and the intensity of the fire throwing up 300-foot flames, that it would throw embers. Some of those embers went as much as 20 miles away and were still lit when they hit the ground, many of them 8 and 10 miles away. And in other areas, as in Ascension Parish, we had roots and other things burning underground, burning under our fire lines and popping up on the other side. So a very unique set of circumstances where we had to do a full court press to fight and control these fires.
The Tiger Island fire, that was, you said that y'all had controlled the first.
We had contained and controlled the first 8
acres.
8 acres, and so then there was a reignition.
How did that reignite? Was that one of the
arson?
It reignited because of arson.
Arson.
Did it first start because of arson as well?
We don't know that yet.
Okay.
No, we don't know that yet, but the second ignition, we feel very strongly that it's arson.
Okay. Is that the person or people under that situation? Has an arrest been made for that fire?
Arrest has not been made for Tiger Island. We just made an arrest for the Highway 113 fire, and that was a 7,000-acre fire. We've made a total of 6 arrests in that same time period from August 22nd to now, and those arrests have been made across the state. But we are still investigating a number of other fires, and we will continue with the investigations. The Louisiana Forestry Association, and also with people adding to that, has put up a bounty of up to $15,000, a reward for arrest and conviction of people involved in the Tiger Island fire, in the Ida fire, the Highway 113, and I think the Elizabeth fire. Those major fires that were concentrated in a very small area, really, of the state, very concentrated area where we had these major and continuous wildfires.
We have heard in the past that Beauregard Parish is usually a place that is particularly a problem with
if
fires.
You look
is that accurate?
Yes, it is. If you look at a multi-year average, you can see a higher number of fires in that Beauregard area. Now, but when you do the analysis, if you look at Beauregard area, you see a very large concentration of large tracts of timber. And so if you look at that, it's a very unique situation. It is, very close to the Texas line. And so, we're wondering, looking at weather patterns in that particular area. And it doesn't seem to generally, and most of the time, get the moisture that other parts of the state get. And so we're looking at that. We went back and looked at the 10 and look at 20 years back. And there's always been a higher probability of larger fires in that area. But when you do an aerial reconnaissance, you'll see that entire area is just about solid timber, the entire area, very large tracts of timber, and those large tracts are next to each other. If you go to other parts of the state, you'll have a large tract of timber, but then it'll be fairly isolated by itself. And then there'll be fields or other things that, there are boundaries. But in this particular area, it is pretty much solid timber.
So you'd say isolated and separated by row
fields,
crops?
Row crops or other type, or water,
pastures,
water bodies.
Okay.
Water bodies, row crops, water pastures. Yes.
Water, you had mentioned, that is a problem as well with all of the low humidity, the high heat.
Lack of rainfall.
Lack of rainfall.
Lack of rainfall.
To get water to put these things out?
Yes. And, because using the Bambi buckets, you got to find available ponds. We were lucky that Toledo Bend was fairly close by for the scooper planes to get that water. But by and large, as you look at the top 10 inches of soil, it's very dry. When we look at soil moisture, we look at the fire index, the KDMI fire index. The majority of the state today is still at 500 to 600. And if you go into the Ritter area, it's probably around 700 plus on the KDMI index. Okay. And that looks at the top 10 inches or so of soil, and that is a relative fire index between 0 and 800.
Okay. Can you explain that a little bit more in layman's terms as to what
there's
that
a fire
means?
Index that looks at the probability of the surface area being conducive to propagation and continuation of fire if it starts. Okay. And so it looks not only at just the top 1 inch, but it looks at moisture through the first 8 to 10 inches. So it's a holistic approach. So we use that along with the drought index.
What is the fire situation at this moment, at the last week of September?
It's under control.
Under control.
It's under control.
So
and most of it is
mean?
80 to 95% contained.
Okay.
That means we have fire lines around them. We're fighting the normal number of fires. Mm-hmm. If you look at our current, fires that we are fighting, we are probably averaging now 7 to 10 a day. Average burn is 18.1 acres. And so it's more of what is we normally see in a given month. But the whole thing is, and the 18.1, normally our fire is between 8 and 11, is the fact that these dry conditions, it burns quicker. And of course, fire burns three-dimensionally. It will burn, circular. And so we're back into that more normal fire pattern, but we're working very hard with everybody and telling everybody, please don't light that match, do everything we need to do, and investigating every source of every fire.
With that normalcy returned, you're on your normal patrols, is that correct? Or
what we do,
wait
we
for someone to call in?
No, sir. Anytime that there's the ability for a fire, in other words, on any given day when the the humidity, when the dew point and all those sorts of things reach a point where the land can burn, we have aircraft in the air. They fly in grids. And they fly a grid, and when they see smoke or they get a call from 911, so you have our aircraft, you have 911, you have citizens. There are multiple sources to turn these fires in. And so in the more remote areas where there are no people, it really relies heavily on those aircraft. And then by other methods, you get someone called 911, or they call the fire marshal's office or the local sheriff, whatever. That is relayed to us, and then the aircraft immediately goes to that area. We plot the lat along, and ground crews are notified exactly where the fire is. And then the aircraft stay in the air and direct the ground crews, watch over them, in an overwatch fashion to make sure they stay safe, to watch them as they fight the fire, if the wind shifts, the fire shifts, whatever. So when they get there, there's a dozer driver, then there is someone that is on the ground monitoring that. And if it's a major fire, there are multiple crews with a fire boss. And on these larger fires, for the first time in history, we've had to use air cover. And so that is something that routinely has not been done here in Louisiana, but these big major fires, the National Guard and anywhere from 4 to 7 Blackhawks, a Chinook, and then we have the aircraft. So we would have the scooper planes, we would have the air tankers, and then the very large air tankers. And so when you have the fire running in the canopies and you saw flames 300 feet, now the tree's only 100 foot, but it would vaporize all of the sap and turn that into liquid turpentine and volatile organic hydrocarbons, and those would ignite. But the only way to fight that fire, especially in the more mature and tall trees, you got to knock it back to ground, as we say. And so for many days, we would fight the fire and hold it back all day with the use of air cover, and then have to hold the line at night. Win in the day, hold the line at night.
Wow.
And so then you push that fire back when you get it to ground, and then you have to keep it from jumping the line. And so that's the hard thing, because it burns so hot, and then it could reignite, across, it would jump roads or whatever, especially when it's up in the tops of the trees. And we would lay down retardant to stop the advance, to protect communities, homes, and, try to stop the advance with the retardant. And we would lay down water on the top of the trees where the fire was active to knock it down the ground, where we could get our dozers in there, where we could fight those fires.
The most recent arrest that we had seen was, the Highway 113.
Highway 113.
Is that the Union Hill fire?
Yes.
Okay.
And so that was the Union Hill and the Plainview Fire Department area. The arrest of Miss Laura McLaughlin of Pitkin, Louisiana. And again, that fire was more than 7,000 acres. Total loss of timber at $2 million, 7,000 acres and a home, and suppression costs at $2.7 million. She was booked at Rapides Parish Jail on 4 counts of arson and obstruction of justice.
With that value of timber, and that was it 7,000 acres?
7,000 acres and a home.
Do you have any idea of the total value of timber that has been lost so far?
Well, if you look at it, if you just put an average value of 1,500 to 2,000 acres on 50,000 acres, so you're probably pushing $100 million.
Wow.
Easily. And when you start looking at the cost of fighting these fires, we haven't added that up, but it's going to be between $50 and $100 million.
And that is that a calculation that is given to the prosecutors to consider when going to court?
The actual cost of the fires, and we tabulate that on these fires, and we will have it to the dollar. That will be given, to the prosecutors. And also, we are working with the federal government on what's called FMAGs, which are an assistance grant that you apply for during the fire as it is burning. And it's a 75-25. Federal government will pick up 75% of the cost, but you have to have an exact accounting of every dollar spent. So we know specifically on the 113, it was an FMAG fire. They have to rise to a very, large-scale fire in danger communities to be a named fire and an FMAG fire. And then based on the number of acres, it's an estimation of loss. And so that will be more accurately defined, as we move forward. But it's safe to say, with the homes lost and everything else lost, you're pushing $5 million on the 113.
When most folks see wildfires, it's out west, and they have their own troubles. And when it hits closer to home, we don't hear as many times that homes are in danger, but there are homes sparsed out
There are
all
homes
over.
in we call it the wildland urban interface. And so you have the wildland homeowner interface. You know, when you travel, and especially if you fly in the little airplanes with me, you look out in these forests and you'll see a roof in the middle of the forest. And so if you look at, the town of Maryville, it was interfaced, and the timber came right up to, the town limits there.
Wow.
And so for 5 days and 5 nights, we had one standing order: do not lose Maryville. Whatever it takes, we are not going to lose a town. And they fought it to a dead standstill. I got within 3,250 feet of Maryville. And that was the Department of Ag and Forestry and the local and volunteer firefighters. And that was before we got the assistance. It takes a number of days for those teams to get in place. It takes a number of days before we can get the National Guard to get the helicopter staged and get the flight crews in and all that. So initially, yon, and we're used to that, and then they come and give us, assistance, in these battles. But if you look at that 32,000 acres, we had plowed that, and some of the areas we had plowed it 8 wide. I mean, eight dozers wide, and it still was jumping it.
Wow.
So that tells you how hot the fire is.
Having a fire less than a half, or a little more rather than a half a mile from my house would be a bit unnerving, I would imagine.
Mm-hmm. So in a number of these fires, our crews would get there and have to evacuate the people and plow lines around the homes and then engage the fires. And so, and of course, working with the volunteer fire departments as well. And so a lot of discussion what we're having is if these weather patterns continue, we've got to have more equipment, and we're going to need some aircraft so that, before, when we can get the National Guard and the air tankers, because they were based out of Abilene, Texas, those air tankers. And, of course, we did put a mobile air base, in Alexandria as the fight continued. But we need some air tankers to where that we can engage, and I'd like to have 3. And when the fires start, we can leapfrog them here to assist, our crews, because I have 96 650 dozers, and I have 5 750 dozers. We have 20 more that we have bought and paid for and waiting on delivery, and we're going to ask the legislature for another 25 or 30, and men and women accrue them, because I do think that next year we may still see these same weather patterns.
Hopefully this is an anomaly, and next year will be more of a normal
Well, we're
year.
hoping what the weather reporters are telling us that a La Nina is coming, and that we will see that in January, February, and March.
Okay.
However, you don't know, and these weather patterns have been very different, and so it's always better to be over prepared and ready, for battle. I think our men and women did exceptionally well, in fighting these fires. But I can tell you, when you look at my firefighting equipment that was in these fires, these dozers ran around the clock. We just shift people in and out of them.
Wow.
They took a lot of wear and tear. And some of them, are reaching the end of their functional life, so they need to be replaced. We need some new equipment and some new transports, and we need more equipment, because, again, we don't know what next year is going to bring. And the other thing is that we have to, everyone, look, arson can't be tolerated by anybody. People live in the wildland interface, and so you're not just out there burning the woods for turkey season. There's people's homes and lives, and we're so fortunate. No one died as a result of direct result of these wildfires. And so, but people lost their homes. Good people lost their homes, and in many cases, it was a result of arson.
This is not the case of neglect or negligence, rather, in someone flicking a cigarette out the car window. This is purposefully set.
That's correct. Now, if you look at the wildfires, you have electrical issues, a squirrel or a vulture land on the lines or whatever, and then start a wildfire. You have those that are started by someone burning a debris pile that gets out of hand. They're not doing what they need to do. You have some hay balers catch on fire. You have some that are cigarettes. You have some from trace chains dragging on the interstate. But then you have those that are purposefully set. And, generally they set them in such a way as that, they are designed to try to overpower the firefighting capacity. We were out there fighting fires, and they were setting them to the rear of us as we're fighting fires. Now, you think about that, purposefully setting them. In other cases, they will wait until we just about got the fire pinched off and start another one. And they keep leapfrogging. And so those need to be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law.
In that case, you're not just setting a fire to cause damage. You're purposefully putting people's lives in danger.
That is, by definition, domestic terrorism. And so when they're doing that in effort to overpower the government's ability and the volunteers' ability to fight fires, and you're putting people's lives at risk. It's one thing, now as I was talking with Wade Dubé, our state forester, the acts of nature, the acts of God, we can battle those to a standstill. But when you're dealing with organized arson, it brings it up another level in firefighting.
Okay, you mentioned organized arson.
That's when you have multiple people involved with a specific goal and objective.
Working in conjunction with everyone?
In concert, yes. That's
correct. So a single or few groups are purposely setting fires that are not where you're fighting right now?
People within an organization, within some type of small organization, purposely setting fires in such a manner as to make it very difficult for us to put them out.
I can't imagine the amount of malice one would have to do that.
That's correct.
Just beyond my comprehension.
And that's why we are very aggressive in arson investigation. Working with, our arson investigators, our enforcement agents, the fire marshal's agents, the local sheriff's office, all of the federal agencies as well, working with the National Forest, people from, the U.S. Forest Service and others. And these investigations, they don't end. They don't stop, and we will eventually, find those that are responsible. They will be held fully accountable.
Now, you had mentioned earlier that through the LFA and others that the $15,000 reward is out there for information leading to the arrest and conviction.
And that makes a big difference. That helps. That really does help. And I can tell you I'm very proud of, the Forestry Association. It started off as a $2,000 reward. And individuals have added money to that to bring it to $15,000.
I think that is evidence of
the number of the legislators in the area say, Mike, I'm putting my own money in here, because we've got to do something.
Wow.
Yes.
If someone has information, anything whatsoever that can help, what do?
They can contact our 24-hour hotline at 855-452-5323.
Dr. Mike, thank you very much. I appreciate you being with our podcast.
And remember, only you can prevent wildfires. Don't light that match.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for listening to Minding the Forest, a podcast of the Louisiana Forestry Association. This episode of Minding the Forest was sponsored by First South Farm Credit. First South is your premier rural lender. With over 100 years financing timber and agriculture, they have the expertise you're looking for when financing rural property. If you're looking to purchase or refinance land, call your local First South Farm Credit office or find them online at firstsouthland.com. If you'd like to learn more about sustainable forestry, the LFA and its programs, or how you can be part of an organization that supports landowners, loggers, and wood manufacturers in the state, go to laforestry.com. You can also send comments or suggestions to me via email at jzeringue at laforestry.com. That's jzeringue at laforestry.com. Or check out the show notes for our contact information. And remember, at the Louisiana Forestry Association, we're minding the forest for you.